Mining exports are set to be downgraded by more than $100 billion as China's faltering economy leaves a large deficit hole in Australia's budget. Joining me live is Economist Saul Eslake. Saul, good to see you. So Treasurer Jim Chalmers will release the mid-year budget update on Wednesday. It does contain some bad news. Just how bad are things looking for China's economy?
Well, China's economy has been disappointing since the end of the pandemic. Indeed, since the late 2010s, it's been coping with a gradual deflation of its property market that had been a mainstay of its economic growth from the global financial crisis until about 2017-18. And then, of course, the pandemic lasted longer in China than in any other major economy. Since the end of the pandemic, growth has consistently fallen short of expectations, and China, unlike almost every other economy in the world, has been confronting deflation rather than inflation, and China's authorities have been surprisingly reluctant to deploy monetary and fiscal policy measures that they have in response to previous downturns in order to boost China's economic growth rate. That appears to be because Xi Jinping places more weight on matters of security and sovereignty than he does on economic growth, as his predecessors had done. And in some ways, it's surprising that the impact, the consequences for Australia of this persistent weak performance on the part of the Chinese economy haven't impacted Australia's commodity exports sooner than they are now starting to do. Australia's done remarkably well over the past couple of years, from unexpectedly high iron ore, coal and LNG prices, notwithstanding the weakness in the Chinese economy, but that now seems to be washing up on our shores in a more full-blooded way, and we'll see the impact of that in the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook when Treasurer Chalmers releases it on Wednesday, in the form, we're told, of an $8.5 billion reduction in the forecast of company tax collections for this financial year, for example, and that will probably continue into the other 3 years of the 4-year forward estimates period.
That $8.5 billion drop in company tax receipt revenue, what's the main driver behind that?
Well, the mining companies are amongst the most profitable businesses in Australia. They do typically pay the full 30 cents in the dollar of profit to the government in company tax. So if their profits are downgraded significantly as a result of lower prices for iron ore, and to a lesser extent for both types of coal, then that inevitably has a significant impact on the company tax revenue that the government would otherwise collect. That may be partly offset by upward revisions to forecasts of collections from personal income tax, because, as we saw last week, employment growth has been amazingly strong given how soft overall economic growth has been. And of course, people getting jobs, earning wages and salaries, they pay income tax on that, and that will cushion to some extent the impact of lower commodity prices on what the government collects from company tax. But overall, it's likely that the budget deficits that have been forecast for the current financial year and the 3 following ones, in contrast to the surpluses that have been recorded in the 2 past years, that those budget deficits will probably now be bigger than had been forecast in the last budget that was brought down in May.
The Treasurer has unveiled his picks for the new specialist interest rate setting board. What's your reaction to the announcement last hour?
I think he's right to say that these are credible appointees who will bring needed skills to the task of setting Australia's interest rates. I don't think you can make any judgment as to whether these 2 new appointments make it more or less likely that the Reserve Bank will cut interest rates in the first half of next year, or when they might do it. But they, in the case of Ms. Fry McKibben, she is one of Australia's foremost academic economists. She was one of the 3 people who conducted the review of the RBA that led to the creation of this separate monetary policy committee. The other appointment, Marnie Baker, I don't know much about personally, but she's been a successful leader of a successful financial institution. And as the Treasurer says, she will bring to the new committee's deliberations knowledge of conditions in regional regional Australia that the existing members, probably can't do. So, yeah, I think they are both credible appointments, and the Treasurer has made good choices.
How do you reflect on Tim Pallas and his 10-year reign as Treasurer of Victoria after he announced his retirement from politics today?
Well, as your Victorian reporter Simon said just a few moments ago, Tim Pallas is widely acknowledged as being a decent person, and I would agree with that from the limited contact that I have had with him. But he has presided over a significant deterioration in Victoria's financial position. Victoria now has, or will have by 2028, the last year of the most recent budget for which he's been responsible, public sector debt of in excess of $220 billion, compared with around $35 billion when he first took up the job. Now, some of that was the inevitable consequence of Victoria's experience of COVID, which was worse economically and in other ways than other states. Of course, that was in turn in part because of choices Victoria made as to how to handle the pandemic that were different from those made by other states and territories. But during Mr. Pallas's time as Treasurer of Victoria, Victoria has also embarked on an extraordinarily ambitious infrastructure spending program, which in at least some respects, though not personally the fault of the Treasurer, have been poorly planned and executed and subject to very substantial cost blowouts that have added to the debt. Victoria's also consciously chosen during Mr. Pallas's time as Treasurer to spend significantly more providing services to Victorians than, according to the Grants Commission, it would have needed to have done in order to provide the average level of services. And it's only been recently that he's elected to part pay for that high level of service expense by increasing taxes. And those taxes inevitably will have some adverse impact on economic growth. A subsequent Treasurer, whether it's Mr. Pallas's immediate successor or another one, possibly in a different government, is going to have to make some more hard choices about both taxes and service and capital expenditures if Victoria's financial position is to be put on a more sustainable trajectory over the longer term. But Mr. Pallas is leaving that to someone else.
Saul Eslake, we'll leave it there, but appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Kim.